Greetings, bike travelers and bike packers. Welcome to another episode of the Chainwheel Diaries podcast. Stories about bike travel told by the travelers themselves. I'm your host, Brian Berlin. My guests today are Dave Morris and Wendy Holmes, a seasoned bike traveling couple that have ridden on several continents. They are an absolute delight. And in the interview, we trace their beginnings from their time together in Britain's Royal Air Force to starting their bicycling adventures in British Columbia, Canada. Dave and Wendy are living proof that we can continue to explore the world by bike even in our golden years. I found their stories inspiring, and you will too. Now, on to the show. Dave and Wendy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So tell us about yourselves, if you don't mind, a little introduction. Who are you? Where are you?
We live in Squamish in British Columbia, the west coast of Canada. I've lived in Canada since 1976, although I don't sound like it, I know. And Dave has lived here since we got married in 1997. We originally met when we were in the Royal Air Force in England when we were in our early 20s, and then just stayed in touch and finally got married, as our friend said, about bloody time, 25 years later.
That's beautiful. So Royal Air Force, I got to ask, tell me a little more about that.
Well, we're both from, I'm from an Air Force family. My parents were both in the RAF in the war. And my dad was a pilot. My mom was a radar plotter. My brother was an RAF pilot. He died in a plane crash in 1971. And that was the instigator for me to think about joining that big, happy family, as it were. I joined in 73, I think, as an air traffic controller. Dave was already in the Air Force. He was in movements, as they call it. We met in about 72, 73, I think. And then we went out for a while and part of the same group of friends who are still our friends now. And then I came to Canada in 76, and Dave, as I say, came over when we got married in 97.
What brought you to British Columbia in the first place, Wendy?
My dad did his RAF pilot training in the war in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So he'd always raved about Canada. And I've had itchy feet for as long as I remember. When I was about 3 years old, I decided all I wanted to do in life was travel. And here I am. So that was the sort of the reason for coming to Canada. And I started out as a nanny in the first year in Toronto, actually in the eastern part of Canada, but then came west and just fell in love with the mountains and the scenery and can't seem to leave it.
Dave, how did you end up in the RAF?
I joined as a 16-year-old, and I had no intention of joining the Air Force, but my mum wanted me to stay in school and do possibly go to university or something. But I had a summertime job delivering bread, and we used to deliver to this RAF station. And there's all these airplanes flying around and everything, and every day. Anyway, one day I was sat in the van while the guy was getting the paperwork done, and I just sort of happened to read his newspaper, and there was an advert there for RAF apprenticeships. And I was reading this, and all of a sudden, this airplanes flew over. And out of the blue, I just filled this form in, and I got home and put it in the post without telling my folks. Anyway, this thing arrived and everything. And my mum was absolutely not very happy about this. She wanted me to stay in school and everything. My dad, come from a big military family, was all for it. He was, oh wow, great, fantastic, So at 16, I went and joined the Air Force, and I signed on for sort of 12 years or whatever it was. They trick you because your service doesn't start until you're about 18. So they got 2 extra years out of me. So anyway, I did my sort of 14 years as it was, and then I had a big decision to either stay in right to the end of my working life sort of thing, which was financially very good, but I didn't want the forces life to continue. I just wanted to see what was out there in the world, so to speak. So I actually came out after that my time period was up, which it was a bit of a struggle at first, but I did manage to find a good job, and then finally we ended up coming to Canada.
So you're the first couple that I've interviewed on the podcast, and I hope to interview many more. But it's a different dynamic. You've done a lot of touring together as a couple. So let's start with, we want to inspire listeners to hear your stories and say, I'd like to do that, or I could do that. And I could go with my mate, or I could go with my better half. I could, I could undertake something like this. But give me kind of the history of how you got started and what motivated you to take up bike touring.
Well, we've always had bikes. Most English people have. They grew up with bikes, biking to school. We've always biked to work all the time in Canada. And then there's a Grand Fonda that comes through from Vancouver to Whistler most years. And one year, I think it must have been 2011, perhaps, we walked down to the end of our road to watch the riders coming through. And I said to Dave, oh, this looks really good. We should do this. And we didn't even have road bikes at that time. We just had regular commuter
mountain bikes.
Yeah. It's a big mountain biking area here. So we had sort of mountain bikes. And so we signed up, we bought road bikes and we signed up and did it the next year and thought, oh, this is really good. But that's only a one-day event. So then I got reading. I went to Dave used to work for Mountain Equipment Co-op, which is like the Canadian equivalent of REI in the States. Okay. He was there for 19, 20 years. Anyway, they had this book, which I will hold up, the Adventure Cycling Association one. I read that from cover to cover, literally got totally hooked on the idea of, we can do this. Why not? Other people do it.
Yeah, we managed to do 120 odd K on a Grand Fondo, and that was 2 years running.
I just said that because we did that 2 years running, and then thought, well, that's a one-day event, but how does it work if you're doing biking day after day? How are you going to do on the saddle? How's your backside going to do, and the rest of it? Mm-hmm. So the following year, we did 2014. We did a supported tour with the Adventure Cycling Association through the Sierra Nevada from Truckee to Mammoth Lakes. So it was a 6-day tour, I think, camping, but they carried all the gear. We just had to ride the bikes. We had a fabulous tour leader, Greg Edwards, who's an ex-pro racer apparently, and he's still leading.
I've ridden with Greg Edwards on a tour.
He's a lovely man.
He's fantastic.
So we might do another tour with them in the future, but of course that's always in American dollars, which we Canadians, that comes out quite a bit more expensive. Anyway, having done that, we thought, okay, we can do day after day. And then the following year, 2015, going back a bit in my family history, I said my brother died in a plane crash in 1971. And it was because of his skill as a pilot and his heroism that he and his navigator died, but they saved crashing the plane into the local school, saving hundreds of children. So I had found out, and I can't even remember how I found this out now, but somebody had done a memorial to Keith and his navigator, Chris, in Germany where they crashed. And I managed to get in touch with the man who'd arranged it, a guy called Ludger Rodenstrom. Can't remember now. Anyway, and they were going to have the unveiling of this memorial, and they would really want us to be there. So naturally, we wanted to be there. So I said to Dave, why don't we go on the bikes? Again, we didn't have touring bikes at this point, but
we should say that Wendy's brother was a keen cyclist, and
he was
won a few medals at cycling. Yeah, he was an RAF champion, wasn't he?
Yeah. So there was a big cycling link there as well. Yeah. So that year we decided that we would go and visit all the relatives and friends in England, but we'd do it on bikes, and then we'd carry on to Europe, and that turned into our first big tour, the 5-month one. When we started it, Dave was very kind of digging his heels in. I don't know if we could do this. And by the time we got off Eurovelo 6 in Mulhouse, I think it was, he said, I don't want this to end. And I thought, oh, yay, I've done it. I've convinced him. So then we sort of started doing something every year, basically, really big trips. We've reached the point now, we've been to Australia and New Zealand twice, well, New Zealand 3 times. We've done India, but that was with Tour d'Afrique, which is a Canadian touring company. Difficult country, and I didn't want to try and organize that myself. We've been to South America on a supported tour with Exodus Travels. That was very good. Otherwise, we prefer to do our own thing and not be stuck with somebody else's timetable, you know?
Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, we didn't really enjoy the supported tours as much as doing it on our own, you know. It was like you spoon fed everything, wasn't it?
Yeah, and we like a bit more, well, a bit more adventure. We got a bit too much the last trip, but you know,
it was a bit more.
we always seem to take bad weather wherever we go, but I think that's part of the pleasure, is a funny word, but of knowing that you can overcome these things. You know, you figure it out as you go along, you know.
that's why it's an adventure, and that's why it's worth undertaking. So I take it you ditched the mountain bikes and you got into touring bikes. What are you riding now?
No, we've got all 3. We've got mountain, road, and touring, because we do everything up here. We're in, say, a big mountain biking area. Dave does the really difficult stuff. I do the easy trails. And we use the road bikes just for training rides, on because we have to go along the highway, but then we've got a couple of valleys that we can ride up, so we can put in a sort of a 50 or a 70k training ride quite easily, and we use the touring bikes for that. The road bikes. But the touring bikes, you know, at this time, well, we wouldn't ride today, it's too cold and frosty, but if we'd use those in the winter months, if we were going to do a training ride, just because the tires are wider, a bit safer on slick roads than the road bikes.
There's a lot of gravel we can do here on the touring bikes as well.
Yeah.
So they're steel frames, so they're pretty tough. And so we can do a lot of gravel riding as well.
So it's interesting how you came about this, and I'm looking at your journals, and not a lot of North American rides per se, and a lot of overseas rides. And what what sent you in that direction?
Well, I guess the Europe bit was obviously visit family, when we've done England a couple of times on the bikes, family and friends. The Australia, New Zealand was because for 2 years I worked in Saudi Arabia, and I met some fabulous people, all of us expats from around the world, and I'm still in touch with everybody. So that was a chance to visit our friends in Australia and New Zealand, and we just love New Zealand. That's the impetus to go back there. But as regards not much in Canada or North America, because we're getting older, we thought we'll do the big trips overseas while we can still get insurance, for one thing, for travel. And you know, if the going gets tough, we can. It's easier to get back from somewhere in North America than it would be from Europe, say, you know, if you have to come back quickly or something. So that's why this last trip was the last big one that we'll do overseas. So this year, for instance, we've just got a local trip to Vancouver Island sorted out, and we're going to Quebec in September. And we'll probably do more North American next year as well, which is not to say that we'll never go to other places, but I think in future we'll do supported tours with a company where they provide the bikes, and where we're not away from home for so long, because it puts a lot of pressure on our friends to keep an eye on our house, and we don't like asking of them all the time, you know.
Yeah, there won't be insurance problems with being away and everything. It's leaving the house empty for some time. We were let down by a house sitter on the last trip at the very last moment, so it put a lot of pressure on us, really.
Yeah.
And you're always wondering what's going on back home, especially winter comes, and sometimes we get a lot of snow here, but we haven't had this year.
No. We don't always get a lot. We're actually at sea level in Squamish. We're surrounded by mountains, but we're actually at sea level. So we do get snow, but it doesn't usually stick around for too long. But nevertheless, it is a worry if your house is, snowed in. We have to if we were away for many months in the winter, we'd get the plumber to come and switch the water off and drain all the pipes just in case there's a freeze up. And that alleviates some of the worry with the insurance as well, you know.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, and that is people are probably wondering, how do you plan for these long bike trips? There are a lot of moving pieces and parts, and you seem to have a pretty good handle on it, but how do you plan all this, and what tools do you have, and how much time do you put into it? How does that work?
Well, usually the timing, usually about a year to organize it, because it's fun. It's fun planning, never mind doing. It's more fun planning sometimes. It's easier.
I think she enjoys the planning more than the actual riding.
It's less hazardous, let's put it that way. I use Excel spreadsheets. So sort of the number of, and also when we're overseas, we're limited by visa days. For instance, the last one to Europe, where you're stuck with a 90-day visa. So that's what you've got to work with. Then you figure out what exactly you want to see. And I start linking up the dots on Google Maps, and then usually work out, usually average an 80K day for sort of to see what's at the end of 80K. Is there a town? Is there accommodation? We don't do as much camping now, although we're going to this year, but it's a lot of extra weight to carry if you're not going to camp a lot, So then having worked out the 80Ks, if it's a very hilly day, I'll shorten it to see what comes after 50K. Is there a town there? And then I work backwards like that. And then I sort of fill in this spreadsheet with all the mileage. I try to have 3 days riding, then a rest day. It would have been 5 days when we were younger, but now it's 3 days. That's enough. Also trying to have rest days where there's something of great interest to see, and perhaps 2 rest days if it's a really good, interesting place. Like in Spain, we had 2 extra days in Granada, and 2 in Cordoba, and about 4 in Seville, because they were big cities with lots to see, But normally 1 day is enough, and we like small towns. We like to wander around little old museums. And for instance, in New Zealand, we love going to the movie house because we don't have one in Squamish. And there, all of their cinemas are in resurrected churches and things like that. They're in lovely locations, and you meet all the locals, So having done all the planning and figured out the dates, if we're visiting people, making sure that they might be there or not, then and only then do I start booking flights and perhaps hotels.
Yeah. It was quite funny in New Zealand because we were in this little place called Cromwell, and they had this little theatre in an old church with about 20 seats in it, something. So we went there and watched the movie, and then we were back in Cromwell a couple of years later.
The next year, wasn't it?
Next year we went back again. And we went to the movie house, and they were showing the same film.
And we said, no, we saw this last year.
It was quite funny talking to the lady there. She said, I said, have you been playing this every night for a year? And she said, no,
it's just come back again.
Come back again. So,
yes.
Anyway,
that would have been funny.
Yeah. So I think if you enjoy planning, it's you have as much fun doing the research as you do doing the actual trip. And it's also a way of then figuring out how much roughly the whole thing is going to cost you, because I also start looking at hotel costs if we're doing hotels, and having a kind of idea of the finances. And then as we get closer to the time for going, everything starts to get confirmed. I make sure that I've got all my banking stuff on my phone, and that I preset a lot of prepayments. So I try not to do much banking when I'm on the road, This last couple of trips, I've put eSIMs on the phone so that we're able to get data when we're actually on the road. We always try and get hotels with Wi-Fi, but it's good to know where you are when you're actually in the middle of nowhere or in the middle of a bunch of olive groves, and which one are we in the middle of now? It's helpful then to have some data.
I like planning too. I've also planned my way into some misadventures where I have routed myself into dead ends and had to backtrack and cross over highways and do some things like that. Have you experienced the same?
We have. Where were we? Can't remember which trip it was now. We ended up on maybe it was the start of this trip. It was the last trip was so difficult. I lose track of the days. But we ended up on a highway where bikes were not allowed. And we thought, oh God, let's get going before the police see us. And we did. We pedaled like hell and got off at the next exit. And I don't know how we ended up there. I guess the Garmin must have misread one of the routes, that we were there was perhaps a fork in the road and it took us down the wrong one. But we've ended up on some very mountainous roads sometimes, which are actually okay if they're tarmac. We can get up most things, even loaded. But when it's gravelly or rocky and you have to get off and push, or in England, we've ended up on bridleways that have been so overgrown you could barely battle your way. Yeah, the Sustrans routes. Yeah. But I say you just sort of deal with it. We don't very often have to. Well, we don't usually have the option to back off because we're in places like that. There is only one road to get from A to B, so you're going to have to take it regardless, you know. And I do seem to think when I do the planning, I think, why did I plan this?
We've been using lots of route planning websites like Komoot and Cycle Travel. But we find with them though that they tend to you actually on a highway or something, you're going pretty well, and then they actually turn you off the highway to go up this gravel track or something, and then within 2 kilometers off, however many kilometers, you're back on the same highway again, you know, and they've diverted you up this great mountainside and back down the other side again. Some of the route finding has been a little bit difficult with some of these websites, you know.
I've always said,
especially when you don't know what the roads are like when you're in a strange place, you know. We had a few issues with that, didn't we?
I've always said that not Google, the other one, not Cycle Travel, is it Komoot? Whichever one it is, it'll take you up the side of a cliff if it thinks it's the quickest route.
Yes.
Whether or not you can actually cycle it, but very often it'll take us 2 sides of a triangle or 3 sides of a square.
Yeah.
I've read that on other journals. Other people have got the same issues, you know.
I guess these are electronically controlled, so they're unaware where they're sending you. Yeah, they're just connecting dots electronically.
It's that's basically it, Dave. I use Ride with GPS. That's similar to Komoot, and yes, I drew my own routes because I thought, okay, I don't want to ride on this highway, so I found a parallel road that I could follow. But what I've discovered that's working better for me is to just look up the area that I want to ride, and somebody else has already ridden it and developed a route that's probably better than anything I could have come up with on my own. So you know that somebody rode it and didn't die or didn't get lost.
Yeah.
And that's a plus. And if you want to edit it and make it a little longer, or you want to start in a different place and end in a different place, you certainly have the capability to do that. But in all these interviews that I've done, everybody at some point in time has drawn a route that is just a line on a page until you actually get out there and start writing it.
Yeah. And you can see the profile, but it's not very accurate. You know, you think, oh, that's a hill. Yeah, it's a hill that's in kind of purple, so it's really steep. And then sometimes you'll get there and it's not that bad. And other times you'll get there and it's dreadful and you're off pushing the bike, and that's really hard on a loaded bike. But the most of the last 2 or 3 years, I've been using Cycle Travel as my sort of starting point for figuring out routes, partly because it'll tell you about accommodation along the way, and it'll give you the profile and the rest of it. That's been useful. And very often Dave has downloaded that, but it's not necessarily the best route. And also it probably goes via Komoot. Does it go anywhere?
Well, no, we sometimes will plan on Komoot as well if we don't like the Cycle Travel one, but invariably they both look the same.
Yeah, they look the same. Yeah. And you know that some days you're going to be in for a really tough day, you know.
So I want to talk about some of your adventures. I'm looking at your journals. You've done Australia, New Zealand. I see you did Nova Scotia. Tell me a little bit about that. It's a lovely place. I've been there. It's really unbelievable.
Yeah, that was again, let's try and do something in Canada early in the year. Unbeknownst to us, the tourist season doesn't start till June the 15th, which was the day that we left Nova Scotia. So we had a few, and I pre-booked all the hotels, partly because we were there for 3 weeks and we wanted to use our airline bike bags, our foldable bike bags. So we needed a hotel that we could leave them in for the 3 weeks. So then I ended up booking hotels for the whole thing. And we found that it was, I don't know why we were so surprised, but it was hillier than we thought, like really steep hills. It's heavy chip seal, a bit like New Zealand is, which makes quite tiring riding. And the trouble is that all of the roads that you're on are surrounded by forests because we have a lot of trees in Canada. And so you think you're going to follow a road that's near the ocean, but most of the time you don't see anything except trees. So that was disappointing. It's not to say we'd never go back, but the route that we took over the 3 weeks was not always particularly inspiring. We could have done, perhaps if we'd taken 6 weeks, we could have followed the coastline off to the west and come in on the north side of that peninsula. And I think we would have had some more interesting sights then. But as it was a bit dull. The good thing was that we had a couple of rail trails that were, one in particular was very difficult to ride, very rocky. But when we got to the Fundy Interpretive Centre, I forget which town it was, near Truro, I think, we were talking to the lady there about how it wasn't necessarily very bike friendly, although they were trying to make it that way. And she suggested that I write to the Ministry of Transport and also the tourism people. And I got some really good responses from both of them, from real people, not from a computer. So I knew that they'd actually taken note of what I'd said as how to make it a bit easier and encourage more cyclists to go, you know.
I think the problem with the rail trails there, that you, like you say, you're going through these tiny little nice villages where there's probably lots of opportunity to have a coffee or you know, or see an old church or something, but you're going along the rail trail. They don't even indicate where you are. You know, a little sign on there, you know.
Yeah, there might be a side trail, but it doesn't say where it goes.
And so you, in effect, unless you're taking a good look at the map all the time, you're just going past these little villages or little towns where, you know, there might be a stopping point that you might like. And so I think they would seem to take that into
I think so.
Consideration that a lot of these little towns were being bypassed, you know. And, you know, if you took the road route, that'd be fine. You'd be see all this. But if you're on a rail trail, you're missing a lot, you know.
And you're missing food opportunities as well. Which is kind of
I think that's true. You went on all these overseas trips. I'm curious about how you managed the bikes. You know, if you check them as luggage, if you shipped them, how did that all work out?
We always put them in, well, apart from the Halifax trip, we always put them into cardboard bike boxes. Dave puts, sometimes we have a shop do it, but usually here Dave will do it because he's got all the gear. And then coming back, we usually, you know, get a bike shop to do it for us, and then just pick them up. That didn't work out so well on the last trip because they put Dave's bike in particular in a too big a bike box, and then we couldn't get it through the security and nearly missed our flight. So I emailed them to say, you might want to look at the size of boxes you're using. It's okay. And when we go, we usually fly Air Canada because we're on Aeroplan points. We try and gain them or use them. And they've got this, it used to be that you'd have to check it as extra baggage and let them know that you were flying with it. Well, now you let them know that you're flying with it. And now instead of paying $100 for extra baggage, you only pay $50 for a bike. And I think that's really weird because it's just the same size that it was when it was $100, but that's great. And as long as it's registered and you've got proof that it's registered and prepaid, then they can't refuse it when it gets to the gate, unless it won't go through the x-ray machine, which is the issue we had in Lisbon, you know. So that's, in some ways it's simplified it, but you always do worry, like coming back from the last trip, we had a week in Lisbon at the end, partly to be a tourist, but also because we knew we had to get the bikes sorted. So you've always got to allow time to get the bike boxes, do it yourself or get it done. And because we've got 2 bikes, we always have to arrange for a van taxi to get us back to the hotel, and a van taxi that can take 2 bike boxes and 2 people. It all becomes a little bit fraught at the end. So I always give us at least 3 or 4 days to sort of chill out at the end and know that we've got everything sorted, you know.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to pack the bikes when we leave, but there you still got the same problem of getting bike boxes and maybe having to move empty bike boxes to wherever your accommodation is. So in effect, it's if the bike shop can do it, it's not very expensive. It saves a lot of time and effort.
And by then you're usually a bit tired of the bike. You're kind of glad to say, okay, you deal with it.
Let's talk about your most recent trip, your European trip. I read the journal, and there were days when you were looking for some scenery, but it just didn't happen that way. But overall, how did you like the trip, and what were some of your best experiences from it?
Well, we met some great people. I think the scenery was good most of the time when we could see it. On the rainy days and cloudy days, of course, we were missing a lot of really nice scenery in the mountains. A few days were a bit boring. We did get a bit, the olive groves get a bit tedious after a while. They're fun to ride because it's kind of up and down roller hills, but the scenery itself becomes a little bit tedious. We met some great people, particularly in Grazalema when I was sick going up the mountain, ended up pushing my bike, or Dave pushing it, for about 8K. And we met this lovely English lady who kind of rescued us and got me to the hotel and got me sorted and stuff. So we met people like that. But I think the biggest thing from Spain in particular was that we didn't speak any Spanish to speak, really, So we were always glad to finally get into our room and kind of relax and have a sandwich and think, okay, where are we going to go for dinner now? That was the other issue.
Dinner was a problem.
The eating hours in Spain are so different, not only to what we're used to, but also when you're bike touring, they don't match your beginning and end of the day. And just then all of the kitchens are closed. So, and they're not going to open until 8. So, you can't get a decent meal until 8, by which time you're falling asleep, and it's just too
8
late.
Is quite early for
8's very early. The latest we ate, I think, was 9:30 one night, and then we had a dreadful night's sleep because we were so full from dinner. It took an awful lot of extra planning to always know that we had food on board, to shop the day before ready for the next day, and to always have something with us to tide us over, and also to even eat at the end of the day, knowing that we couldn't probably get anything. We might get tapas, but we might not,
What would you say to people who have heard your stories and said, gee, I'd like to try that? What would you tell them?
Yeah, you can do it, basically. And don't expect, even when we haven't sort of been on the bikes very much through the winter months, the first few days on the bikes will always feel a little bit strange. Not so much hard work, but they just feel a bit odd. You've got to get used to balancing the bike, but it comes after a few days. And once you get in the rhythm of it, it's a lovely rhythm. It's the old ride, eat, sleep rhythm and repeat, and it frees your mind of all the other stuff. And you realize when you drive down a road in a car, you don't see most of the things that you see when you're on a bike.
So I want to talk a little bit about your relationship and taking these long bike trips together and the challenges that you might undertake. There's a book called Miles from Nowhere. It was written by Barbara Savage. You should check it out. It's really, it's very good. She and her husband, Larry, rode basically around the world and came back. And along the way, they had some falling out. They had some Donnybrooks. They always kissed and made up. But, the being on the road for that long and riding bikes every day can create a little bit of tension. How did you and Dave handle that?
Depends on the bike tour and how it's going. Oh yeah, we had a few screaming matches on this last one, mostly because you have to communicate, but you can't communicate when the wind's blowing in your ears. You're on gravel, you can't hear each other. Dave's too far ahead. If I'm yelling, he can't hear me because I need him to stop. So then I stop and hope that he notices I've stopped, and eventually we'll come back and find out what the matter is, which he will eventually. But there's always this sort of when the going gets tough, you tend to stick together. Actually, even after the screaming match, you do get back together, most definitely. But it's not all plain sailing. When the going's good, it's delightful. we don't talk a lot because we're not on a tandem.
We don't ride side by side.
We don't ride side by side. Dave's always ahead, especially on the hills, but he's always ahead, but he'll always wait for me. There's been a couple of occasions when he hasn't, but I just have to sit and wait for him to come back, because if we're at a fork in the road, say a T-junction, I don't know if he's gone left or right. I think he's gone right, but I'm not sure. So I will sit and wait for him, because he will come back for me eventually.
Unfortunately, when we were going through France, we stopped at the cafe, and we set off from the cafe. And I'm waiting for Wendy, and she.
I set off in the wrong direction.
She went back where we came, and I'm sat on the bike. Where the hell's she gone?
Anyway, it turned out he finally sent some cyclists off in search of me. By which time I was about 5k in the wrong direction, the way we'd come. They towed me back, and then everything was fine after that. I just did an extra 5k.
Yeah, she had to eat humble pie for the rest of the day.
But it was that was the day I said, canal paths look very similar, and that was the day that it proved the point. I didn't realize that I was riding back the road that we'd come in, because it looked all the same to me. It was trees and water. But anyway, it all ended fine.
Well, you're a lovely couple. I've enjoyed our conversation. Do you have any plans for your next ride?
Yeah, this in May, we're just doing riding from home, not using the car at all this time, which involves a bit of highway riding, but we have to do that where we live anyway. We're going over to Vancouver Island, and I will document that on Crazy Guy. We're going to getting as far as Victoria on the sort of side roads, going across the middle of the island. And then we're going to take the fast catamaran ferry from Victoria to Seattle for a couple of days without the bikes. And then we're going to fly back on a float plane. This is a little anniversary present for ourselves. And then we'll continue back home again. And with all of these trips mostly we try and visit friends on the island. So we've got a friend in Victoria, we've got friends in Nanaimo, and we'll also visit Vancouver friends as we're coming back through Vancouver. We always try and tie all these things in, because most of our friends are older like us. A lot of them don't travel anymore, so they don't come here to see us. So we make a point of incorporating everybody on one trip, And then in September, we're going to go to Quebec for a month, which again I'm going to keep studying French for that, because I'm going to need it. And that'll be, we're going to take the camping gear for both of those trips, because we figure we're in the warm enough months that we will have campgrounds available to us. One reason we didn't take them on the last trip to Europe was because later in the year, most of the campgrounds are closed anyway. And we didn't want to carry all the gear for nothing, The other thing I should say is with bike touring is that you don't have to make enormously long trips like we have. And we do them because if we're going to get on a plane to Australia or New Zealand, we might as well spend several months over there and make it worth our while. But you can do a great bike tour in 3 weeks. So even people who are still working don't have to sort of think, oh, well, I can't do this until I retire, because you can. And also, if you're not sure, then just do one of the supported bike tours where they provide the bikes as a test to yourself to see if you can ride one day after the other at fairly big mileage, because there's always a sag wagon to pick you up if you can't. And I don't think we would have started this if we hadn't had such success with the adventure cycling trip that we did, when we felt very comfortable with 6 days riding in a row,
I was just going to say, adventure cycling is a great way to break into it. I did a van supported trip with Greg Edwards through Death Valley. It was fantastic. You take turns, you have cooking duties.
Yeah.
And which is interesting, because my partner pulled me aside after we had our initial meeting the first night and said, by the way, I don't cook at all. I just clean up after my wife cooks. I said, no problem. I'll give you the prep duty. But it is, you're unencumbered, because they are hauling your stuff from overnight to overnight. And that was kind of nice, because there was some difficult terrain in Death Valley, and there was some wind, and so it was nice not to be loaded down entirely. But yeah, it's a great way to break in and see what it's like and see if you like it. And then expand from there. And I've gone from there. I've done overnight bike packing, which is another great way to ease into it. I joined a meetup group. We do bikepacking weekend trips about once a month. We'll probably start in March or April again. So there are ways to, like you say, Wendy, there are ways to accommodate yourself if you're not retired, but you shouldn't give up on the idea of longer trips, even if you aren't.
No, we've inspired an awful lot of people, of our friends. A lot of them are 20 years, many of our friends are 20 years younger than us, and they think we're amazing. I don't know why they think we're amazing, but it's nice that we're inspiring them to think along the same lines.
I think
and I
you're
guess
amazing.
The other thing I was going to say is, don't fear the hills, because if need be, you can get off and push. But I always find that I'd rather deal with hills than headwinds any day. There is an end to a hill, and there's a benefit when you go down the other side. Whereas headwinds, no,
that's right.
Nothing.
Every uphill has a downhill. That's absolutely true. I wish you the best. You're a lovely couple. Wish you the best on your future. Happy anniversary in advance.
Thank you.
And take care of yourselves. And thank you so much for appearing on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
All right.
Enjoy your biking.